You'll never be management material, the CEO's son mocked. Years later, I sat across as lead auditor, reviewing his deal. The board chair stopped at one clause, then asked, "Did you authorize this?" Silence fell. At 26, Daniel Reed had one ambition: to climb the ranks at Sterling Industries, a billion-dollar logistics empire. He was a hard worker, respected by peers, but invisible to the executives who measured potential in last names rather than results. For years, Daniel poured himself into the job. Late nights in half-empty offices, weekends sacrificed to catch flaws in reports before they reached senior desks. He believed dedication would eventually speak louder than family connections. And for a while, he thought he was getting closer. His colleagues often came to him with questions. Even managers couldn't answer. Whispers spread. Daniel is solid, reliable, a lifeline. That invisibility shattered during one fateful meeting. It was quarterly review day, a room filled with mahogany furniture, overpriced suits, and people who measured each other's worth by the weight of their cufflinks. Daniel had presented a detailed compliance plan, charts, graphs, numbers that revealed how regulatory loopholes were quietly bleeding the company of millions. His voice was steady, his research airtight. For the briefest moment, he believed someone at the top might finally notice his worth. But before the room could even process his work, Ryan Carter leaned back in his chair and chuckled. Ryan, the son of CEO Richard Carter, born into the company like it was his inheritance, strutting through the halls with arrogance wrapped around him like armor. He had charm, sure, but the kind that wilted under scrutiny. He was a man who had never fought for anything, yet acted like victory was his birthright. "Cute presentation," Ryan said, his voice dripping with condescension. "But let's be real, guys like you will never be management material. You don't have the presence." The words stung sharper than Daniel could show. A low ripple of laughter spread across the table, not because the executives agreed, but because they feared disagreeing with the heir apparent. Better to laugh at someone else than risk Ryan's disdain. Daniel stood frozen, cheeks burning, pulse roaring in his ears. He had faced rejection before, but this humiliation carried weight. Ryan wasn't just dismissing his presentation. He was dismissing Daniel's entire future, not management material. It echoed like a curse, as if those 4 words were being etched into his resume. But beneath the shame, something hardened. That moment didn't crush Daniel. It forged him. Within a year, he left Sterling, not in anger, but in resolve. He poured himself into certifications, worked across continents, and built a reputation as one of the sharpest compliance minds in the industry. While Ryan spent his years padding Sterling's growth with risky expansions and flashy partnerships, Daniel became the man companies called when their foundations started to crack. His reports were whispered about in boardrooms. His audits were dreaded yet respected. His name had weight. 10 years later, Daniel walked back into Sterling Industries, not as the overlooked analyst, not as the man humiliated at a meeting table, but as the lead auditor from an independent firm, hired by Sterling's own investors. The company had ballooned under Ryan's influence, but so had the rumors. Contracts signed without oversight, deals with hidden risks, whispers of financial structures built on sand. The investors wanted truth. They called Daniel. When he entered the executive boardroom, the first person he locked eyes with was Ryan Carter. Older now, heavier around the middle, but still wearing the smug expression of a man who thought the chair beneath him was unshakably his. Recognition flickered across Ryan's face. First surprise, then disbelief, and finally a flash of discomfort. For the first time in a decade, it was Ryan who looked small, and this time, Daniel wasn't there to beg for approval. He was there to weigh the empire Ryan thought untouchable. This time, Daniel had the floor. The audit was brutal. For weeks, Daniel's team had combed through hundreds of contracts, tracing every hidden clause, loophole, and questionable signature. They weren't just looking at numbers. They were unearthing the bones of Sterling Industries, stripping away the glossy exterior. Ryan Carter had so carefully polished. Late nights turned into early mornings. Every page revealed more recklessness, vague commitments, inflated projections, and financial landmines disguised as innovative partnerships. Daniel's colleagues grew tense as patterns emerged. Sterling's success wasn't built on stability. It was built on bravado. By the time the final report was compiled, Daniel knew exactly what was coming, but Ryan didn't. The meeting was set in the top-floor boardroom, a space designed to intimidate with its panoramic skyline views and 12-foot ceilings. Yet the weight in the air that morning didn't come from architecture. It came from the people inside. Investors with millions on the line, board members who had heard the whispers, and Ryan Carter, who sat stiffly at the head of the table, trying to exude control. Across from him, Daniel adjusted his papers, calm and measured. When he spoke, his tone carried no malice, only precision. Sterling's growth looks impressive on the surface, he began, flipping through a thick report. But several deals were structured in ways that exposed the company to massive compliance risks. One clause in particular needs your immediate attention. The room shifted, eyes sharpened. Even Ryan straightened slightly, though his smirk lingered like a shield. Board Chair Eleanor Hayes. A woman whose reputation for dismantling excuses was legendary, leaned forward. "Show us!" Daniel highlighted the section and slid the document toward her. This clause ties Sterling to a multi-year obligation. It guarantees vendor payouts, even if services aren't delivered. Losses could exceed $120 million, and based on signatures, it was personally authorized by Ryan Carter. For a heartbeat, silence blanketed the room. Eleanor adjusted her glasses, scanning the page with surgical focus. When she read the clause aloud, her voice was steady, but the impact landed like a hammer. Words that looked harmless on paper now echoed like a verdict. She closed the folder slowly and turned toward Ryan. "Did you authorize this?" The smirk cracked. Ryan's lips parted, but no sound came at first. Finally he stammered, I don't recall. Legal flagged it," Daniel interrupted, his voice calm, precise. "You overrode them. We have the email chain confirming your decision." A ripple of murmurs swept across the table. Investors shifted uncomfortably. One leaned toward another, whispering, "This could sink us." Ryan's face drained of color. He had always believed his last name was a shield. That authority was inherited like property. But in this room, stripped bare by black and white evidence, his name had become an anchor, dragging him into waters he couldn't swim. Eleanor's voice cut through the whispers, sharp and final. "Ryan, this wasn't oversight. This was negligence. You exposed Sterling, and every investor here, to catastrophic risk." The silence that followed was suffocating. Ryan looked around the table, but found no allies. The executives who once laughed at his jokes now avoided his eyes. And Daniel, he sat quietly, hands folded, the man once mocked as not management material, watching the air unravel under the weight of his own arrogance. He hadn't raised his voice. He hadn't gloated. He didn't need to. The truth had done it for him. In the weeks that followed, Ryan was quietly removed from his executive role. Publicly, Sterling framed it as a strategic leadership transition. Privately, everyone knew he had been dismantled by his own recklessness. After one final investor meeting, Eleanor approached Daniel. Her gaze was firm but approving. You handled yourself well, professional, surgical. Would you consider a permanent role here? Sterling needs people who understand integrity. Daniel smiled faintly, though his eyes carried something deeper, a memory of humiliation, of the laughter that had once cut him down. He thought back to Ryan's mocking words a decade earlier. Not management material. Thank you, Daniel said softly, but I prefer staying where I am. My job isn't management, it's accountability. And with that, he walked out of Sterling Industries once more, not as the overlooked analyst, not as the humiliated junior, but as the man who had turned mockery into mastery. Because sometimes, the sweetest revenge isn't shouting your worth. It's sitting silently while your doubters destroy themselves and letting the truth speak louder than you ever could.